Hi, I'm Jim,
And I'm Hisham, and this is,
the Quantumly Leaping Podcast.
yes, indeed it is. So, today, uh, as we know, we are always talking about very, very interesting topics and modern. Today is not different, and we're going to talk about cryptocurrencies today, a topic that's been in minds of people for a long time right now, between skeptic, between a total believer and the whole spectrum, between the full skeptic, full believer, and the whole spectrum, and the controversies around it, whether it's like from uh, official entities, or governments or banks or a lot. There's a lot to talk about in here. And I would urge people also to watch our coverages for the Futurist 2018 and 2019. We're gonna post a link in the description on the video, and we're gonna post we have a playlist of our coverage for Futurist 2019, which there's a lot to talk about, interviews about cryptocurrencies and people who are providing ICOs or initial coin offerings. So we urge you also to go with that and know more about it. Whether you are into this field or not, it's going to give you a lot of details. Hopefully, we will be able to go this year as well, given the fact that COVID-19 is going to leave us alone sometime soon. So we'll provide more coverage. So let's begin with. I want to talk a little bit about the brief history to weigh in on what is it, because a lot of people don't know what a cryptocurrency is, and a lot of people think about it in a very skeptic way, and a lot of people are thinking about like very believing way. So cryptocurrencies are like it's a way of trade. You know, the way it is to me or to a lot of people is that the reason of skepticism, I believe, is like people are always like, how do we know what's the value of a currency? But you know, I I would argue, what's the value of our current currency? Because we live here in Canada, and it's like every place in the world, we have this normal currency, right? We have the $10, we have the 50, and we have the 100. They all look the same if you just changing of colors, but they are made of the same material, mostly the same size, and it's a piece of paper. But why are they different? It's because we believe they are different, right? It's because we give the value of that piece of paper this value worth to $20, but this paper values $20, but this one worth is $50, right? And I know that for the people who are interested in one, there is a there's a big there's a book that I would suggest, *Sapiens*. You know about that book by Yuval Noah Harari, who says that one of the three biggest, I think he says, lies or illusions that humanity made is that is money, because money does not exist. It's not real. We made it real because we made it. So cryptocurrency is not a different. And cryptocurrency to me looks like the historical way, like 10,000 years ago, humans were trading as well. We didn't have a currency at the time. We started trading physical things with physical things. So you have oranges, I have some meat, I will, trade that with this, and we evaluate that on the spot. But then when things became bigger, and I want to sell you, let's say, for example, something that does not exist yet, I will tell you, like, give me the seeds, and when I grow these seeds up and my crops come in few months to come, I will give you this value of my seeds. Now, in that case, in that scenario, you don't have the money yet, but you have to, or the one who is giving you the seeds have to base their trade on the trust that you will be successful in doing that, and you will once your crop is there, you can give me. And when the people became bigger and bigger, and people started to not know if I can trust you or not, they will bring trustees, so that these people will testify for you, if that, yeah, I know that he's a farmer, he's always, every year he has these crops, and this year is not going to be different, and he's a trustful guy, and they will gonna pay you back from their crops when they come out. So these trustees are most like what cryptocurrency is. So the thing about it's cryptocurrency, it's a decentralized currency that exists
Yep.
everywhere on server in a technology called blockchain. And usually it was before that people have to agree. Now, once you buy something, a lot of people have to approve that, you know, and say that yes, he does. We know that he does have this money, and now it's becoming automated through the miner servers around the world. So they said, so it is. It's we're not strangers to this kind of as a species, as humans. I mean, we didn't live that time to see it. We have, you know, we lived our whole. We were born into the classic currency that we know, but this is not new to our. But it's done differently now. Like everything we do, it's now done digitally, and it started with something called Bitcoin by I don't know if this is his real name or not, Satoshi Nakamoto, who started that in 2009. And he started actually the technology that's called blockchain for this kind of trusting process. So it's the decentralized data, and it's mostly unhackable and very secure, so that people can approve, or miners now can approve that. And I want to just also say that there's the weird thing is, and we will talk about it in a different topic, but we are in Canada, we're a little bit behind. But the thing is, there's a lot of creative Canadians who actually started this, like Vitalik Buterin, who's Russian, who raised in Canada, who started the Ethereum blockchain, and he was 21. And now this is one of the major platforms for a Bitcoin, and yet we're a little bit behind. But so so this is kind of like the history of how it starts. And nowadays it's becoming very easy to start something called initial coin offerings, or ICOs, that any company could start issuing coins if they are on the Ethereum. And you know, ICOs has raised $7 billion in 2017, and one company has raised 35 million in just 30 seconds. So it shows you how easy it is to deal with it, and how easy it is to issue coins. Yet there's going to be a trust issues where we can talk about it. But this is a kind of like a brief history about this. And I know that you have a story of how you yourself got introduced to that. So I'll let you share that.
Yeah, so thank you for the explanation, Hisham, and for explaining to the audience a little bit. So I was a skeptic. I've heard about Bitcoin. I do a fair amount of networking here in Toronto, so I been getting messages on Bitcoin all the time. So I was a skeptic. And then a couple of years ago, a good friend of mine, Emilio, invited me to help out an event called the FinTech event. So I have a magazine here. It's called FinTech, the Blockchain Confidential. Again, FinTech and Blockchain Confidential by the NCFA. And it's an organization here that does, you can go to ncfacanada.org to learn more about them. So I go to this event. It was a 2-day event. And again, skeptic. Well, after the 2 days was over, I listened to a lot of the industry leaders sharing. I was taking pictures and doing video, but I was listening to them. And by the time I was done, I was like, "Oh my goodness, this stuff's real. There's transactions going on, real estate transactions." And again, I got to speak to some of the leaders, and I got transformed. And then over time, again, I read some books. So there's a book called Blockchain Revolution by Don Tapscott and Alex Tapscott, How the Technology Behind Bitcoin is Changing Money and Business in the World. Yeah. So just showing people, but also telling people here so all your listeners can listen to it. There's another book called Crypto Assets by Chris Berniski and Jack Tatar. Both amazing books. The Crypto Assets talks about what Shab was talking about the history, about Satoshi and how it started. And Dan Tapscott and his son talk about the blockchain. So what I can tell you that I did get involved, not heavily in Bitcoin, but a little bit. And again, I met some of the leaders, and I sort of became an ambassador. Then quickly what happened as that is I met a number of people who actually exchanged and bought real estate using Bitcoin. I'm like, wow. So I have 2 cases proven that they use Bitcoin. And that was like, whoa, if they're buying houses with Bitcoin, then there's something there. So again, there's a lot of Bitcoins out there. There's hundreds of Bitcoins. And, to this day, there's people, making Bitcoin. Now, The Bitcoin has gone up and down. I think now it's up $9,000 for a Bitcoin as of 2 days ago. I still follow the industry, maybe not as heavily as I was, but again, I still follow it. And so again, from the history that Hisham has told you, I recommend people just go look at the books, do some research, because at the end of the day, we're gonna peel this onion here in the next half hour, because a lot of good things, bad things, and ugly things have happened. But the positive thing is currency has evolved. So a quick story I'd like to share is currency has changed. So in Greece, they went from one currency, okay, to a different currency. It happened. It done. It went from they went from the drachma to the euro. Was there protests? I don't think there was. They changed. So currencies in the global scale have changed all the time. Okay, that's not a secret. In Dominican Republic, all over the world, currency has changed over the last 100 years. But what happened with crypto, the biggest thing is crypto is its own decentralized system. When you have a decentralized system, what happens is the banks, I'm not going to mention them, don't have control. And that pisses them off. Let's just use the one word. And this is where things have happened. We're not going to name the banks, but many banks have made it difficult to buy Bitcoin. But the reality is, all over the world, Hawaii, Jamaica, Ireland, UK, Switzerland, Sweden, they are flourishing in this new currency. So the events we went to were again, Hisham mentioned, we interviewed a bunch of people at the Futurist. I have my media pass here from the Futurist event in 2019. And Hisham and I, we interviewed 9 people. We're going to have the information at the end of this interview. Do some research and learn more about it. If you don't want to get involved, not to get involved, but to learn more about it is definitely something good. Even just go during COVID time, lots of time to listen, watch those videos. So I'll throw it back to you, Hisham.
Yeah, and I just want to add the last thing about the history is that maybe it was the history of cryptocurrency was polluted by the fact that it was used on the dark web for underground transactions and Ponzi schemes, and even the people who call you on pretending that they're from the CRA and you have a problem and you have to pay like $5,000 in bitcoins or something like that. So this caused a big pollution in that, whether it was true or not. Some of it is true. I mean, like we've seen transactions for human trafficking or sex trafficking a lot. It happens on the dark web. But there are also, I mean, like, I would just want to remind people that the transactions, the underground transaction that happened with real money, or what we think that it's real money, is still way bigger than what happens in cryptocurrency. But because it's a new thing, and I think always new things create a more fearful atmosphere because people don't know what it is. And because it's also, which is one of the topics that we're going to talk about, it's not going to happen under a control of banks or governments. That's going to be something that we're going to talk about. But before that, I want to talk about the other topic here, is that the rise and falls, which will lead us to the other topic of why skepticism was about. It's like we've seen a lot of times, as I just said, like one company in 2017 raised like $35 million and in 30 seconds. And some of them have raised $1 billion. I forgot what name it is, but it doesn't matter. Has raised $1 billion in 9 months. I mean, Facebook took like 2 or 3 years to raise $1 billion. Google, many years to raise the billion, for that matter. But the companies in this market, and some of them are fake, by the way. Some of them people have been, I cannot deny that fact. Some of them have raised a lot of money from people who invested and they thought they can, and then they just fail. And because there was no regulations, because there was no regulatory rules to it in any way, for that matter, those people just lost their money. And there's this guy who was running this Bitcoin, I think it's in South Africa or somewhere. And when he died, everything was in his laptop, and everybody lost everything. I mean,
Quadrica CX.
I mean, I didn't want to mention or because it could happen. I mean, like, it doesn't matter. Of course, people can find it. But my point here, And there's a lot of companies that could give names about those companies. They failed.
Yes.
But the problem is like that was the rise and fall. And then we hear about big successes like Anthony DiOrio, who was a
Yeah.
Canadian, who was one of the biggest
Yeah.
figures. Which also we also have an interview with Anthony DiOrio, or not an interview actually. It was a speech that is done in
Yes.
2 years ago. We have it also
Yeah.
on our channel. We can share that. But he was one of the biggest figures into that, and he bought a condo in the former Trump Tower here in Canada, in downtown, for $28 million. I mean, like successes like that, says like, and failures. Like, what am I gonna do, right? I mean, like, I want you to tell people about that, because I know that you have a lot of
Yeah. There.
stories. But
Yeah. This is where, like anything in life, ladies and gentlemen, there's going to be the good and bad. Unfortunately, what has happened is the newspapers, especially the ones I read, I'm always talking about the negative stories about Bitcoin. I mean, it's all the time. I mean, it just kept going and going, and I understand, but there, I mentioned the name. You can, I won't mention the name again, but uh, on the other side is when I finished, when the last 2 years now, we've gone to some other events, and at the end of the day, is we're in the 21st century, and we have to realize that the money we have is the money we have. I understand that, but Hisham talked about something interesting about bartering. I'm going to tell a little story. There was an organization here in Toronto that I was working with. That was a bartering organization, and it got very big. They would barter clothes and DVDs and CDs. It was crazy. People were bartering clothes. I mean, I went to a women's event. There was like women were bringing clothes in with hockey bags, right? So this has always been happening. But what happens is innovation happens, and Canada and North America. And I think that what we want to share here is that there's going to be the good and the bad in anything. Um, that's it is. Now with Bitcoin, unfortunately, is that because the banks, and I've had let's say some insightful conversation with regulators at some of these events that they weren't even being nice about it. And I had thank God it wasn't recorded, but I had a conversation with at a panel discussion at the Sixth Summit. Him and Hisham did, and I did, and the lady was making these general statements which were not true. I stood up and I said, "Hey, hello, what did you just say? Can you retract your statement?" And she's like, "Excuse me." I'm like, "No, no, excuse you, excuse me. You cannot make that statement because that your statement is not true." And there's only 8 people in the room, but what happens is they have to look out for their interests. At another event I've been to, it was this fintech event in 2019. The second day of this event, guess what happened? The regulators show up. They put the regulators down on a table, 6 of them, and 175 people are in this room in downtown Toronto. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I was near the front when I was taking pictures. It was a bloodbath. Here's why. The regulators were very, very uncomfortable. Why? Because there was a lot of questions being asked of them. It got to a point where one of the lawyers actually got very defensive, didn't want to answer questions. It was almost like she was on trial. And I'm there trying to, I wasn't laughing at her. I actually felt bad for her. But at the end of the day, it became very evident that the regulators were even having issues with crypto and how it's being used and all that. You hear all the good things, but there's also good ways it has been used as well. And I think that the regulators now are still struggling with it. And that's unfortunate because innovation happens in any of them. We have phone, ladies and gentlemen, with apps. Okay, we have a phone with apps now. I have how many pages of apps? I have 4 pages of apps on my phone. Okay, 4 pages. If you had told me that a couple of years ago, I have an app for this, I have an app for that. So the general thing is that all these books and magazines and events shows that it is real, it is happening. And when I found out that real estate was being sold by Bitcoin, there was other things sold by Bitcoin. DiOrio, which we met, bought the condo Okay, that makes it very real for me now. You know, I invested a little bit in Bitcoin, but at the end of the day, um, there's always going to be a sort of a battle with this. And you know, we're going to talk a little bit about about the government and all that. But I'll throw it back to you. Thanks for letting me share, Hisham. Go right ahead. Back to you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that people are afraid maybe about that because what they hear, because a lot of these news go into the media and they're
And
get inflamed. I mean, I'm not going to say that there's not Ponzi schemes or money scams in cryptocurrency. I just said that we face, and we here in Canada face a lot. But like, I just want to tell people, like for example, the Wall Street Journal published a study a couple of months ago that or yeah, I mean, like recently, and it says like the money or the schemes in cryptocurrency was like about $4 billion in 2019. I just want to remind people that I've heard in a couple of years ago, in a different study, that there are $3 trillion, not in cryptocurrency, like normal currency, are actually just laundered from China through Hong Kong and through some other entities.
mhm,
That's
mhm.
only China. And this is not Bitcoin. This is $3 trillion. If you compare this to only $4 billion, it is nothing. It is it's almost like 10% out of it. And we don't know. I mean, like I haven't heard about worldwide because it's very tough to count it. But $4 billion, okay, that's bad. But we're still are way behind. So, but the fear of Ponzi schemes from cryptocurrency is for some reason higher than the normal money. It reminds me also of like people are afraid to fly because they are afraid to die in a plane, while people die on roads by cars much more every single minute in this world. So this irrational fear is not new to human. That's what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
I would say that awareness is an important, right? Because these are experiences, humans' experiences, and you cannot deny that the human feeling has to play a lot because at the end of the day, humans who are adopting the technology and they are afraid of this technology and they don't want to adopt it, then no one is going to use it and it's going to die by itself soon. Or maybe a change is going to happen, or a breakthrough, and they
Mhm.
would change their minds. It's a human nature, and I appreciate that. Which actually, but again, as I said, we just have to be reasonable about it. Don't go full commando, if for that matter, and don't just don't be totally out, because here in Canada a lot of people are very skeptic. Most people are very skeptics, and this is what puts us a little bit behind. And it's gonna be tough if that's gonna go worldwide, and people and adopting is becoming higher, we see in a lot of other
Mhm.
words, which leads me to our next topic. Why are we still a little bit behind? Is like how governments and big banks all around the world, including Canada. I mean, like we're not different from other that fought back against it, and now a lot of those governments and banks are trying to adopt it. Some of them are desperate to start adopting because they realize that they are way far in other countries where a lot of banks smaller banks started to adopt it and bigger banks not, and now they're
Mhm.
feeling they're being hit for that
Mhm.
matter. In that matter, I want you to share a story, and I know you remember that when we were at the CIX, remember? And there was
Mhm.
a talk
Yes.
about cryptocurrency, and you got confronted by this lady from the government. We're not going to
Yes.
talk about it. When she said cryptocurrency is not a real currency. And now we're just
Yes.
talking about what's real currency. Because to me,
Yeah.
20, the $20 paper, the $50
Yeah.
paper, the $100
Yeah.
paper are all freaking same. They're made of the same material. The color
Yeah.
doesn't change, but we still, when I give this shopkeeper at $20, he's not going to give me something with the value of a $20.01, right? It's not going to happen. So what is that?
Yeah.
But it's the same piece of paper, same material. So what makes it? I wanted you to share people, because I believe that was a very interesting, and it was a hot debate.
It was. Thank God there was a lot of people in the room. I mentioned this story a little bit, but basically, like I said, I've had 2 years experience with this. I became a little bit of an ambassador. But when these people set up, and this particular lady, I'm not going to mention the bank, she says that basically she just said that Bitcoin wasn't money. That's sort of not that. And the hair on my head stood up, and I'm like, okay, I'm going in for battle. And I'm not very a confrontational person. If anybody knows me, including Hisham, I'm not a confrontational person. But I decided to get confrontation with her. I said, excuse me? And I challenged her. And I said, what did you just say? Are we here at the 6th Summit? I've done 2 years of events, and now you're telling me I think you made a mistake, And the other people were like looking at her, and she got a little embarrassed because I think she caught herself telling what she shouldn't have said. At the end of the day, she kind of backtracked what she said. But what I failed to explain to her is that this has been around a long time. Now, if the banks are against this, which we know they are, then you're really, really admitting it. That's fine. But it was just her candor that she mentioned it. And I'm like, she's like, there's only 6 people in the room. Thank God. Imagine it was on audio. We would have caught this. It would have been the rage. But I want to mention the story again because what happened to me, ladies and gentlemen, is because after I became a realist, many people were calling me out, saying, "What are you doing crypto?" Because people started seeing the interviews I was doing. And I had these discussions with people, and it was almost like, okay, how much time do you have? And explained the whole cold notes about money evolving over the world. And within 10 minutes, I had them flipped over. And here's why. It's all about understanding and education. And this is why we're not saying that, cryptocurrency is the be-all, end-all Bitcoin. That is not what we're saying here. What we're saying is that innovations are happening, and either we're going to join it. Now, unfortunately, what's happening is with Canada specifically, ladies and gentlemen, the banks are making it difficult. One major bank, we're not going to mention, actually didn't allow people to buy Bitcoin through their credit cards. This was about 1.5 years ago. I'm not mentioning the bank because I don't want to get in trouble. But it was all over the news. It was insane. So why I tell you this is now the banks are kind of changing their tune and want to get into it now. Like, what happened in less than a year that this would happen? This is really kind of weird, especially when everybody's waving the flag, writing books. Canadian Dan Tapscott, Blockchain Revolution, a Canadian wrote this. And magazines and all sorts of things. So, Hisham and I have interviewed a futurist, 9 people who were involved in crypto. And we did other events. So the analogy I want to leave you with before I throw it back to Hisham is he just mentioned how much real money is in the world. 9 trillion, you said? Something?
3 trillion from
3 trillion. So if 5 billion are in crypto, that's not really, I thought not even a drop in the bucket, realistically, to making it, what's wrong with that? Right? Here in Canada, one other story, there's north of Toronto in Richmond Hill, Ontario, they're allowing the people to pay their property tax via cryptocurrency. This is true. I'm saying it because you can Google it. People, we're allowed to pay cryptocurrency. So some municipalities are allowing people to pay by Bitcoin. So if that doesn't make it real for you, I don't know what else I can tell you. At the end of the day, we're not saying everyone to jump in. That's not what we're saying or Hisham is saying. We're simply saying is currency is changing. That's it. So I'll throw it back to you, Hisham.
Yeah, and I just want to have like a small thing about the story that you just told about this lady. I was there, by the way. For that.
Oh, you were there? Oh, you were there?
I remember. I was
Oh
actually sitting, and they told me not to film because
really?
it was so, and I was like,
oh my God, I forgot you were there.
I don't want to judge people, but it might not be a very clever thing to come to a tech conference and speak against technology. That blunt. I mean, if you want to bring it in a way, but
Oh my God.
it's really a
It was.
stupid thing, to be honest with you, to say.
I
And I'm
forgot
not
you were.
judging
So you
that.
were there. You were recording. You were recording there. I forgot. I forgot.
Yeah, I was recording, but then they stopped me because they say, "Oh,
It
this is
stopped
a
you.
yeah, I know." But I think that what they
Oh my
wanted to do is
God.
not just because of a legal thing. Is just they didn't want to put that because it was very controversial, and it's like
Oh my God.
this whole speak was against the idea of a conference like that. It's a conference of technology, and we're talking about the changes that technology is doing to the world, and you come and tell me like, oh, this is not money, and like at least be a little polite about it to the people who are
Oh
in
my
the
God.
room.
Yeah.
I remember also people started to leaving when she was
They
speaking.
were. They
A lot of
were.
people left because it's like, oh, this is not what I want to listen to. This is worthless. But here's the thing. My point is like this woman was I don't think was she from the government? I'm not sure, or from the bank,
No,
but I
she was
believe there was.
from the bank. She was from a
Yeah,
bank.
but
She
there
was
was
from a bank.
another. Okay, so the other guy, I don't want to mention names, was
Don't
from the
mention
government.
names.
Yeah, was also from the government, and he was also
Yes,
very offensive. That was like 2018, right?
it was. Yes.
2019, we hear that the government, the CRA, which our tax department here in Canada, are actually trying to regulate how they can collect taxes, not in Bitcoin, but at least what they are considering the making the Bitcoin or the cryptocurrency as a commodity. So you have to pay taxes for it. Now you have to pay
Mhm.
until now you have to pay taxes in real or in what we call now real currency, but you have to pay taxes for your digital assets, which is a cryptocurrency, which is a first step of the government or the federal government saying like we are gonna adopt the cryptocurrency in shortly, and that's like in
Mhm.
less
Yeah.
than a year because that conference was like October 2018.
Yes.
And in early 2019, the government, because they were talking about it for before they were trying to make that happen before the April, because this is the time that we submit our
Yeah.
taxes. So that was like
Yeah.
less than even 6 months they were
It's
talking about.
crazy.
And see how quickly changes are,
That was
and how the
fast.
yeah, and by the way, the bank that you mentioned is not the only one. I've seen a
Yes.
lot of banks around the world who have fought, and still some of them still fighting against cryptocurrency with all their might. But here's the
Yeah.
thing, like it's like it's like people who fought against the internet at the beginnings. There are a lot of organizations fought against the internet
Yeah.
or against specific types or protocols on the internet. And where are they now? Either they adopted or they just crushed down because you
Yeah.
cannot
Yeah.
stop that from happening. And whether you like it or not, you have to somehow um, adopt or accept. The least thing that we're asking people here is to accept that this is happening. You don't want to be there, just accept that sometime some people are gonna adopt to it, and at some time, I mean, like many years ago, banks were like a luxury, you know. But right now, it's a real necessity. You cannot do anything without a bank, which is gonna lead me now to our next topic. Since we talked about the changes that happen, and now banks is something necessary, and will cryptocurrency become the new global financial order? Because again, 100 years ago, banks were really luxury. Like the people who put their banks money in the banks were like the elite, the creme de la creme, the people who can afford to put money in banks. But right now, even uh, I know that some homeless people have. I mean, like, of course, not to demote, but they do have the bank accounts. It's become like a right, like you have the right to have the bank account because even if you're homeless or if you're whatever you are, you want your tax returns, and the tax returns comes now through the bank. So a bank check, you have to go and physically to get it from a bank. So it became a necessity. And that maybe took longer because there was no technology, but now the technology makes things faster, like 10x times, and cryptocurrency is becoming so. I don't know. I mean, like, we defied a lot of people. I believe defied the currency model that we have many thousands of years ago because they couldn't feel that I'm giving you oranges and you're giving me apples. There's no physical thing. Now they're fighting the same fight, and we know that this fight was lost already, historically speaking. So, I mean, I want you to because I know that you have thoughts on the future of the cryptocurrency.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate you explaining things. I hope it helps the audience understand it. At the end of the day, like I said earlier, I was a skeptic, and I became understanding it. You go to the source, you understand the source, you interview individuals, and I think that there's a part. I think it has been already. It has become of our global currency. I don't think it's getting respect still. And that's kind of interesting. I've done 3-4 events I've done, and I think it's not given respect. And I kind of I don't understand it in some ways, where there's cases that real estate's being shared. There's cases people are buying things, and I'm not sure because we don't want to innovate. Like, we couldn't consider ourselves an innovative company. Just recently, we had a big situation here in Toronto this week, where Google Alphabet pulled out from the waterfront to do this big project in tech space. But the reason I mention it is I think sometimes, we want to move forward, but sometimes we're moving backwards. And with Bitcoin, I think that Bitcoin has been around since 2009. Okay, 2009. It's 11 years. And it's been a bumpy 11 years. They've had their highs, they've had their lows, but every industry is going to have that. But again, we're not saying run to buy Bitcoin tomorrow. That's not what we're saying. We're simply saying is that there's another option out there that you can partake and learn from. And I think now with what we're going with COVID-19 right now, and all what's happening to our economy, let me tell you, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency looks very attractive right now, because this our economy has been affected top to bottom, east, west, north, south, everything. So this is something that may be something that we look into. But I from what I've read, and I told you I've read books, I've listened to audios, that there's some serious money to be made in Bitcoin. And again, something Hisham mentioned earlier about banks. I was reading a book about the history of money, and I just read a few chapters. And what Hisham says is true. Okay, that's where this started. We've been doing that. So all I encourage our listeners and people watching is do some research. You have a thing called the library. There's magazines. There's educational content. Read up on it a little bit. That's what we did. That's what we did. And we decided to do this show here in season 1 rather than wait, is because we had some experiences. We had some fantastic interviews that we were going to be sharing. So all I say is I think it's a good discussion to have, and that we mention both sides. But I think that sometimes the good is sometimes muddled into the bad, and especially when you keep reading about that. So I thank Hisham for explaining what you've done here in this show. I think it's been great, and I've tried to add some realism as far as stories and as far as being a skeptic and not being a realist. There's a big thing. So I'll throw it back to you, Hisham.
Yeah, and it still feels weird to me that here in Canada we have a lot of innovative solutions, and startups that has done a lot of nice work, and they rose up in cryptocurrency. But on the government level, we're still very, very slow. We're still very conservative when it comes to adopting these technologies. While we see other governments are adopting, like in Asia, they have Singapore, we have Malaysia, we have Indonesia, we have a lot of them has tried to do that. There's a lot of even, investment into that in countries like Russia and Iran. I mean, like,
Mm.
Most people say that they're doing that or they're investing on a governmental level because they want to cripple their sanctions, the international sanctions that they do over them. Uh, Now, despite our political views about those countries or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
they feel the need to do that, and they're investing into it, and they're getting ahead of us, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter
Mm-hmm.
that we agree or we don't agree with the purpose of their doing it, but they're doing it
Yeah.
anyway, and
Right.
it's happening, and we're not following for that matter. And we know that when it comes to technology, either it's not going to stop. Like when a technology comes out, you cannot just stop it. It's if it bad or good or whatever. Technology is not bad or good. It's how to use it anyway. But if a new technology comes out, either you ride the wave and you try to do your best to make it
Mm-hmm.
better, to regulate it, or to
Yeah.
make it the better, or you wait or you defy until you get hit by a tsunami. Yes,
Yeah.
it is going to be a tsunami hits us that if we didn't move on, whether
Yeah.
it's in a cryptocurrency or specifically in blockchain, which is going to be another interesting episode. We'll talk about it later, and we even might have some guests for that matter.
Yes.
But we'll leave it there, and we don't want to spoil it for you guys, for our audiences. But there's going to be a talk about blockchain as well, and what it does. And as you mentioned as well, I see with COVID-19 and what's happening all around the world, like there are now about 30 million uh, people who are out of work in the United States. And I know it's a pandemic, it's a crisis, but the thing about, if you look at it, if you look at the root of it, now there are thousands of them waiting in lines for food in food banks, and I mean, I know we might have a lot of our opinions about different opinions about United States, good or bad, or how did they dealt with this crisis. But seeing people in this situation, all begging for food, is not a nice thing to see. It even for your, I mean, they are neighbors and friends, but even for your worst enemies, you don't want to see that. There are people at the
Yeah.
end of the day, and if
Yeah.
you look at the source of the problem, it's a source that's related to income, and income is related to money. Money is currency, and currency is controlled by specific entities, right? And if you don't work, you don't get that currency, then you're worth nothing. A lot of them have left homeless in the richest country in the world. And I when I
Yes.
see that, it really is really sad. And
Yeah.
uh, it makes me think, like, what was wrong with people 10,000 years ago when they didn't have that currency, when there was a trust, and I can build my purchases over trust. You know, we didn't end up like uh, I don't know. We didn't have or distinction because we didn't have money. We didn't have money. We didn't have the currency at the time anyway.
Yeah.
But we lived,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
at the time, whatever people might think about me being crazy or whatever, but that was the time we were flourishing as well, because that led us to where we are right
Yeah.
now. You
Yeah.
know, and that would lead, I mean, to the closing or the conclusion of that is that
Yes.
no matter what you are, which side of the aisle you are in, cryptocurrency has changed the world. And I personally believe that if cryptocurrency was widely adopted, those people who have financial problems, or relying, those people who lost their jobs, if they have that way of cryptocurrency, the way that you could trust and trade, and you have a different source of income that is not controlled by a single entity, maybe it would be better. I mean, like, what do you think about that?
It's an interesting question, and again, we were discussing this previous time, and all I can say is that innovation and the way we look at money, and the illustration you shared at the beginning, is Sham, about a $10 bill and a $50 bill and how we look at it, was for me when I was listening to it, like, wow, okay, I've heard it before, but I want to go back to that because the way we look at the money monetization, and when you see the biggest, most powerful country in the world, which has 360 million people, get 30 million people not working for work, and you see it's a very stark thing. Here in Canada, we have 30 million, and yes, we have all sorts of businesses now going bankrupt here the last 2-3 days. Retail stores going bankrupt, but we're talking about people who have worked loyal, worked for companies, and now are in line to feed their families. That has caused a huge stress in other areas of this world. Mental health, and we've talked about that in a previous show and all that. So I think that cryptocurrency has already changed, but I think that it needs us. That's why we done this show, to have those ambassadors to come in and say, listen, this is a legitimate option, and have the governments and the banks done their thing? I don't think so. Like Hisham said, we've had some interesting discussions with regulators, and I've had some discussions with regulators. But at the end of the day, I think it's the more you share about it, and they're doing huge conferences on this here in Ontario. I can imagine what's happening all over the world, and a lot of these speakers are going all over the world and speaking. So what I can share is that do your research, watch some of the interviews that we've done, get informed. If you feel like it, then do some more research. And it's not difficult to do that. But I think that we have to look at this COVID-19 has changed the fabric of not just who we are, but humanity. And maybe we have to look at money a little differently now. We have to look at the transactional, I was trying to find the right word, the transactional way we do life differently now. So the example you shared, Hisham, I think was brilliant at the beginning of the show, because that's how it was. That's how it was, and we still,
we're still the same species.
We're still the same species, yes. Sorry, we are. But like our organization here in Toronto built a huge business on swapping. And let me tell you why. This wasn't a small business. This went on for 6 years. We did events indoors. We did events outdoors. People were flocking to trade DVDs, to trade games, to trade clothes. It was insane. And I still have pictures. I look at it sometimes. I'm like, what was going on? And it made me realize that we already have this stuff around us, but we couldn't sell it. Is there still bartering going on? Absolutely. I've bartered. I have bartered many things. I bartered electronics. I sell a lot of stuff now, but I do barter. I have bartered in the past. So
because it doesn't have a value to you right now, even if if you swap an electronic device that was really expensive with a smaller piece, even like a flower, let's say, that would die. Because to you right now, that electronic, no matter how much you bought it for, does not worth it, because you're not using it. It doesn't have any worth in your life. But that flower might make you happy for a day or whatever. It doesn't matter, because comes on what we value. And I want to remind people that my example about money is just about money, but now people are dealing with credit cards, money we don't own, debit cards, money we own, but we don't even see. I just go and tap. I mean, I know that there's something in the bank, but do I know how the money goes? And I have no freaking idea how that happened. But still, people accept that card. And when I tap it,
Can I share about tapping? Okay, because we've gone over time here. Yeah, I remember when tapping happened, I was resistant to tap. Okay, I was honestly.
Not just you are 90% of all people population.
I remember this is about 1.5 years ago. I was like, tap? Sir, you have a chip in your card, you tap. I go, is it safe? I was asking, is it legal? The woman behind the counter says, sir, you've never tapped? No, I have not. I've been,
swiping.
Swiping. Okay, well, sir, you just have to tap now. And I remember the moment. I was like, like 7-Eleven. And now I don't even think about it, I mean,
it became a no-brainer,
I spend almost, I bought groceries. I bought everything. I buy my parents all my parents them because my mom doesn't want to use their credit card, whatever. I was like, okay, use mine. So I'm tapping.
Yeah. I mean, this is
tapping.
Yeah,
So,
this just shows you that people
oh
have
my God,
adopted to that. I mean, like
it's
I
so
don't
funny.
see
So true.
it just why won't you adapt to a cryptocurrency? Why now you would tap a
Oh
card?
my
It's a
God.
plastic, it's a piece of plastic, and with a small chip, and you
Oh
just
my
tap
God.
and you pay.
What a way to end
It
the
is
what a way to end the show, Sean. I don't think we could have ended it any better than this. So,
yeah. Actually, we are actually a little bit over time, but
it's time we are, but
I
we're
believe
doing
the
good.
ending was the cherry on the top of this episode
Yes, it
because
was. It was.
it is it's I mean our whole show is about our
Yeah.
passion, our personal experiences, and why we wanted
Yes.
to deliver this message. And I believe this is what we're trying to do. I believe this is why our audience is following us. And
Yes. Yes, they
thanks for
are.
everyone who are listening to
Thank
us
you. Yes.
and
Thank you.
paying
Yes.
attention. And we hope that we will always reach the level of your expectations and give you more
Mm.
topics. And we're going to talk about blockchain in a different topic. And
Yes.
also, we're going to have some. It was supposed to be one episode, but now we think it's
Yes.
going to be a more episode, a bunch of episode about the world post COVID-19. How do we think it
Yes.
could? And cryptocurrency and blockchain is going to be a huge
Yeah.
part of these episodes because we think
Yeah.
that it's going to play a big role in the world post COVID-19. We're optimist as we always are, and with that, I say goodbye, and I'll let Jim say your final goodbyes.
Yeah. So this is Jim. Thanks for listening to the Quantumly Leaping podcast. And until next time, thanks for everybody for listening. We'll talk to you
Thank
soon.
you. We'll
Bye
see you in
bye.
the next episode.
Bye bye.